what I enjoy about my job. And I really see it that way, despite and in addition or beyond all the specific knowledge, the professional knowledge we bring in, the diagnosis, psychological formulation. I think it's fundamentally a human encounter. And humans being social creatures and us living in the social jungle, I just really mean this descriptively, a conflict is inevitable. Conflict as in disagreement, all the way to falling out with a person. And that might be in our workplace, in our partnerships, in our friendships, in our family life. I think it is just part of being a social creature and wanting to live connected with others, in partnerships, in groups, belonging to clubs, to football teams, to whatever it is. So it's not a question of how can I sail through life without disagreement or conflict. It's how to maneuver it and how to do it in a way that both parties find themselves in a win-win. It's a bit like negotiation, I suppose. Often people do come, and part of their trouble, part of their difficulties is that they find themselves in conflictual situations that hasn't been solved yet. And how to approach that. Now, I wouldn't pretend that I'm a master of that or I have a ready-made spiel, because there's so many different situations. So I'd just like to maybe share some reflections on that. Because I think and I often say that actually, hopefully the good times everyone can have together. That's easier. I think the art of long-term relationships is how one together solves mini ruptures, or what I call mini ruptures. Of course, sometimes it's more than a mini rupture, and sometimes ultimately maybe one has to go separate ways. But it's certainly often worthwhile to find ways of attempting to make it work again. And I think if one, and many people, maybe everyone has hopefully an experience of when you overcome that, it strengthens the relationship, be it in any context, really. So what are the first steps to take? Either when I'm a part of the conflict, like a party in the conflict, or when I am maybe on a bystander in a sense. Let's say there is a really difficult atmosphere in the office and I'm part of the group, although not directly involved. Now that might change what I can or can't do, but some principles, some ideas might still apply. In the first instance, it might be important to take a step back, because when I find myself in a situation like this, I think our system is activated. We feel aroused, agitated, either anxious or angry or both. It could be quite an emotional turmoil, and it's probably not a good situation to arrive at least as possible biased judgment. So taking a step back, allowing my own agitation maybe to calm down, sort of time out really, like in sport, I suppose, and in a calmer moment think about what is actually going on in the situation. Perhaps thinking about where the other person might be coming from. That's a good starting point for any negotiation, and in fact is to understand the other person's or the other party's position. So that's important, because what do we tend to do? We tend to take things very personal when they are not. Now that might sound difficult, and often things do feel very personal, but actually very often they are not. It's just where the other person was and what is said and what is done. It might really not be directed at us. We might just happen to be there. So that's important. Is it really as personal as I perceive it? Because that brings up our defenses, and we all have our patterns, how we react. It's often an autopilot, and it often is not the best way forward, however understandable. So that timeout helps with that. And then is, how do I approach the other person? Again, it's just difficult, because approaching it has to do with feeling vulnerable and maintaining, in the face of maybe criticism or when I feel under attack, is maintaining still a certain spirit, if at all possible, of kindness and generosity. That I'm willing to go and approach the other person. And a good start is to acknowledge where the other person is, or where I perceive the other person is. So it's something like, I can see that you're really angry with me. I can see that you're really agitated. I can see that you're really unhappy with my behavior. And then one can also bring in one's own position. Usually we don't do that. We become defensive and we say, but you always do, and you never do, and it's all your fault, and everyone knows this, and everyone will smile about it. It was very stressful, and it will just up the stakes, and doesn't really help. So if one can find that, if one can, as a leap of faith, trust that the other person is also committed to make it work, that we cut people a bit of slack in terms of benefit of doubt, that we don't take it personal, that we don't become too defensive, or we begin to just open up again and rein that in a little. That probably some ideas of how to approach it. And again, in our sessions, we can look at, of course, specific examples. We can practice maybe how to go on about this. It's also a question of my own values. Maybe sometimes I can reflect and say, I understand where I came from, but I'm really not happy with my own behavior here. I wish I had dealt with this differently. So the question of, what sort of person do I like to be, and how do I like to behave in these sort of situations that is in keeping with my values, that I'm happy with the way I behave. And then, of course, it takes two to tango. There is a limit to what I can control and what I need to take ownership of. If I reflect I made a mistake, again, we often find it very difficult to just straightforwardly apologize and say that we are sorry, because that opens up vulnerability in a way. Then maybe that's something to consider doing. So there are many ways, but it's taking a step back, taking a deep breath in, as I do now, and then thinking about, what actually happened, what are the positions, and how can I best approach this? And a good approach is to acknowledge the other person's position.